School is back in session in some parts of the country, and already students are being sent home to quarantine. So a second grade student in Georgia tested positive this week, forcing the entire class to go home. This was only after 2 days back in the classroom. Earlier this week, we showed you these alarming photos. These are students in Georgia packed into a hallway with little to no masks in sight. Doc, where are you? She's in pink sorbet and polka dot. She looks like a medical Audrey Hepburn. Unbelievable. Dr. Kohli joins us live. Welcome. School openings are the hot button issue right now. But before we get into it, I have to bring up a quote from President Trump. Yesterday, he shared a video claiming that children are, quote, almost immune from this disease. Now, I want to make our audience very clear. The post was taken down by Twitter and Facebook for being false. But Doc, another scenario where now we're hearing things from different sources. So I'm asking you, an expert, how high is the risk of COVID-19 when it comes to children?
So scientifically, children are not immune from catching COVID, and they're not immune from spreading COVID. Now, some studies have suggested that the risk of children contracting COVID is about 1/3 as much as the risk to adults. And we've also seen that nationally, less than 2% of the cases occurring in the United States that are confirmed are in kids under the age of 18. But Tori and Al, there's two really important caveats to this data that we have to keep in mind. The first is that so far during the pandemic, our kids have been relatively protected at home. So they've been staying home, they haven't been going to school, and that could be one of the reasons that we're seeing fewer cases in children. And as they go back to school, the number of contacts increase. Some studies are suggesting they're going to have 3 times as many contacts as the average daily adult. We expect the cases to go up. The second caveat is that children tend to have milder symptoms, and they're the least tested population out there. So we may actually be underdiagnosing the cases in kids. And so the bottom line is really we need more scientific data to know for sure what the risk to our kids is, but they're definitely not immune.
Good to know.
Well, that's the thing, Doc. We know what happened. We have a good idea about what happens to adults that catch COVID-19, but what can we look for in our children? Like, how will we know if they're affected?
So, Al, what we know is that about 90% of kids have mild or no symptoms, and these symptoms tend to be similar to the symptoms in adults, with fever and cough being the 2 most common symptoms. Interestingly, we're seeing a lot less shortness of breath in kids because it tends to involve the lungs less. But we have seen kids of every age die from COVID-19, all the way from infants up to teenagers. And we've also seen that some kids can have a complication after the infection, even if the initial infection is mild, called multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, which can be life-threatening.
Yeah, I've heard of that with rashes and stuff on the skin and everything. Yeah. Doc, what do you recommend right now to people watching that are saying to themselves, do I send my kid back to school? We have hosts that don't know this answer.
This is a really important question, Tori, and I would say there's one key decision point. So the first thing to do is to assess the spread in the community. If the spread is going up in your community, in my opinion, that's a non-starter. Learning at home is safer.
Okay.
If the spread is stable or it's going down, then I do think we can get our kids back safely, but we need to talk to the school about what types of precautions they're taking. And personally, I was appalled that the Georgia schools had made masks optional, because I think that absolutely needs to be mandatory based on the science.
Yeah, a lot of people writing in saying, why don't people just listen? Do you think at some point there's just going to have to be a national mandate for all this? There's going to be consistency like we talked about earlier, or else it's never going to catch on for Americans?
I think that's the problem. In Georgia, they're saying the reason they didn't make it mandatory in schools was because there was no state mandate. But whether there's a mandate or not, we know the science. We know what we have to do. And making masks optional for teenagers is the worst idea, because they're not going to wear it.
No,
you're
absolutely right.
So you have to really do top down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Kohli. You'll be back
I always
tomorrow.
feel like I know more.
What's that?
I always feel like I know more when I talk to
Don't you feel like a little bit smarter?
Very much.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Kohli. You'll be back for Fact or Fiction Friday. I love that. If you do have a question, guys, about coronavirus you do want answered by Dr. Kohli, write us on social media. Email info@dailyblastlive.com.